In a bygone time, we had celebrated architecture critics, historians, and thought leaders like Ada Louise Huxtable, Louis Mumford, Jane Jacobs, and Vincent Scully, amongst many others. These were gifted thought leaders with a willingness to share their views, slings and arrows aside, good or bad, but never indifferent. They and others influenced the manner in which we looked critically at the shape and purpose of the spaces where we live, work, and play. Arc Daily wrote a piece in 2012 called "The Architect Critic is Dead, Just Not for the Reasons You Think." Is it? Is it really? I don't think the architect critic is dead. It has changed. It's like Syndrome's quote from The Incredibles that when everyone has superpowers, no one will be a superhero. I don't know. It's this delusion of meaning through social media where everyone has an opinion and no hesitation whatsoever about sharing it. Very little self-awareness and a platform, then everyone's a critic, right? But without the critical thinking or communication skills to articulate their ideas effectively. Enda Donagher and I chopped this idea up a bit, and he shares his experience in the business over the past 30 years plus. Enda and I talk about the business and his work. Donagher's firm addresses the architecture and interior design, and his work is nuanced through a personalized approach and sensibly modern in look and feel. The ideas regarding the architect critic is relevant for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the opportunity to deconstruct the ideas that go into creating amazing work. If the work can be deconstructed, it provides a forum for critical thought to better our architecture and design in the future. If we can apply critical thought, share ways to improve, then maybe Syndrome was wrong. Everyone truly can be a super because everyone's work is better and the level of expectation is raised. I enjoyed this conversation immensely, and I hope you do too. And you're going to hear all about it with Enda Donagher right after this. I am incredibly proud of my partnership with ThermaSol, presenting sponsor of Convo by Design. They have been presenting sponsors of Convo by Design going on 6 years now. And there is a certain amount of pride that comes with saying that the show is presented by the company that is the best in the world at what they do. ThermaSol engineers the most exceptional smart shower products and steam shower systems worldwide for a few reasons. They were the first company to design and patent the technology here in the United States dating back to 1958. ThermaSol, a US-based manufacturer in Round Rock, Texas, employs an engineering team that designs, tests, and continuously refines the product. Their quality control team tests every single steam generator before it departs the factory. Who else does that? Nobody that I know of. And I have had the pleasure of working with some world-class designers and architects who tell me, and you know this, that the idea of luxury has changed, especially when clients want a spa-like bathroom. Steam is mandatory, or it's just not considered a luxury. And if you want to add steam, you have one true option. It's ThermaSol. And now, ThermaSol, the industry leader in steam bath equipment and technology since 1958, is enhancing its already stellar family of products with new indoor and outdoor luxury saunas, available in 3 design configurations: outdoor barrel, outdoor canopy barrel, and indoor. Each sauna is handcrafted from clear Western red cedar or Nordic spruce, inspired by the brilliance of Northern European sauna technology and design. It makes you ask, without steam, is a luxury bath really a luxury bath? I don't know. Most clients would say they want it, and most designers want to make their clients happy. I think all designers want to make their clients happy. And if you want your clients to be happy, thermosol.com and at thermosol on the socials. I get the question a lot when we start, because I don't, and you can confirm this, I don't provide a great deal of um, lead up, a great deal of talking points, a great deal of like, here's what we're discussing today, unless it's a specific type of conversation, like a panel or something like that. But for these conversations, I don't generally do that. And the reason why is I grew really frustrated. I started the show in 2013. I started it in response to going to design events, right? So for me, Southern California, at the Pacific Design Center, right there. Uh,
Right.
um, I would go to these events and we would have these great conversations. And then after it was over, they're not being recorded. And so much was covered in these individual, personal, one-on-one, personal, professional conversations. And then I noticed that, in the magazines, in the trade pubs, and on stage at a lot of these events, they were very formulaic and formal and specific. And you never got to, in my opinion, like the really good stuff, the really fun stuff that were part of the conversations, the stories, the behind design. And so that's why I structure these as loosely as I do. But I realized something. It takes a little bit of faith and trust on your part to come into that. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's, I think for all of us in what we do, you always want to be prepared for everything, whether it's a client meeting or a presentation or, whatever it is. And I think that's probably why you get that question, right? That people understand it's about making something good, right? You're trying to make something good and, we're trying to be part of that. And that's, yeah, that's probably why you get that. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that our industry, especially now, is we suffer a little bit of paralysis by analysis, whereas we overthink things to such a large degree. And I do blame, I've been on such a rant lately. I blame anti-social media for this because it's unforgiving. And as a creative, look, you're a creator. And if you say the wrong thing out of context or you put an idea forward for discussion, it can and usually is taken the wrong way by somebody
Mm-hmm.
who can totally derail the conversation. And I'm wondering, does that hinder your willingness to put forth ideas?
Oh, it's a great point, Josh. You have to be so careful. Yes, you just have to be so careful about everything and about every post and every comment and um or something that I think with social media now that we all kind of kind of fear is the comments that you get, right? That you worry about that nasty comment, which thankfully I don't think I've ever really had to deal with anything too bad, but it happens. It happens. And then how do you deal with it? How do you control it? So yes, and it's the double-edged sword. That's the price we pay for, this tool that we're using. It's like uh, there's definitely a wild card, unpredictable side to it. Sure, but you just got to forge on.
And I feel like it's more important now than it
Hmm.
has been in the past. I'll give you an example, and I think it's really interesting. I was having I produced a panel at the West Edge Design Fair this past November. And the idea for this one panel was iconic architecture. Um, is it worth saving, or merely a poor representation of a well-known architect? And I had a remarkable panel. I had Eric Peterson from PHX. I had Paul
Hmm.
McLean, one of your countrymen. Um, I had Anthony Laney from Laney LA. I had Jamie Rummerfield, interior designer, great creative,
Hmm.
good friend. I've known her for a long time, as well as one of the co-founders, her and Ron Woodson of CSA by Iconic Architecture. And we got into this conversation, and I said something that I've said before, and I stand by it, but it was really interesting because it caught, like, Jamie recoiled. And we were talking about 1001 North Roxbury, which is a home in Beverly Hills, California.
Mm-hmm.
Remarkable property, just an extraordinary place. And it was torn down because the lot value of this iconic street, they bought the lot for $49.5 million. And then they tore the house down. It just, and the house was published. It was a wonderful representation of that style of architecture. And I said to Jamie, I said, look, here's the deal. I don't personally care that that property was torn down. I didn't live in Beverly Hills. I didn't walk my dog down the street. I didn't play with my kids at the park down the corner. That particular property, it's being there or it's not being there, does not affect me or my life in any way. I said, but I do feel for the neighbors. I feel for the community because they've lost something. The people that used to live there when Lucille Ball lived on one side and Jack Benny lived on the other, and when they walked their dogs past the home, and it was part of that the fabric that makes up that neighborhood. And I said, but I don't care, because you have to balance property owners' rights with community feels, right? And it got me thinking about our conversation today, because that's part of it. And look, not every piece of architecture is iconic. We can't save everything. But Paul McLean mentioned something to me, and he said, because Ireland is so much smaller, and there really is a focus on saving community and what Ireland means to those who live. So long story, long-winded way of just sort of asking you, how do you feel about that? Your homeland and where you grew up, how you learned, how you became an architect, and why. How does that affect the way that you feel about the work?
Well, Josh, are you talking about the idea of preservation as it relates to that question specifically, or?
I think, and that's a really good question, and I'm not sure. I
Mm-hmm.
feel, and that's why I'm asking, because I feel like preservation and the way that you feel about your own work is part of the legacy. It's part of the why you do what you do. Or I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, is that legacy, is preservation important to you? Do you think about preservation when you're doing the work in real time?
Okay.
Or is it just you're working with your clients and you're trying to satisfy them and their needs for right now?
I remember in college, a great professor in UCD of ours, John Toomey, and he had done a terrific he and his wife Sheila O'Donnell, they had done this terrific home in Sligo, actually, which is the town that I grew up in the northwest of Ireland. And it was really an acclaimed house. And I forget the exact details of the story now, but the summary of it was they built this house, and then after a couple of years, the client modified it horrendously or did something to it that was just, you know, whatever. They built an ugly addition, or they did a horrible remodel or something. And I remember as students, we were appalled because your professors are gods, right? When you're an architecture student, especially someone like John Toomey. And we were completely appalled on his behalf. And I remember he said to us, he said, and I've always remembered this, and I've kind of taken this to heart. He said, after you've done your work and after you have, handed that project over, and it doesn't matter how much you labored on it or how much sweat or you put into it, it's not yours anymore. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the client. You have to let it go, and it's theirs to do whatever they want to do with it. And I never forgot that, that lesson just as a student, to be told that and to be given, you're very idealistic when you're a student, right? And, you would think of you, especially architecture, you think of what you do as being like this, something that you can't imagine somebody ever changing it afterwards. And just to learn and to kind of be made aware that no, and stuff gets changed all the time. It's not yours anymore. And I've always remembered that lesson. And actually, it's interesting. I've done a few projects where renovations or jobs that I've done for one client where a home has been bought by another client and we've gutted it and redone it. And that's kind of the same thing, you just have to go, oh, okay, we're doing something different now, and it's all so much of an architectural project comes from it's driven by the client. It's what they want. That's why we're here is to enable that. So in terms of preservation of my work or as an architect in terms of preservation of what I've done, no, I think, I do believe that, once you've handed it over, you've done your job, and hopefully you've done a good job, then whatever happens to it after that is out of your control. And there's no point in getting upset about it. Preservation of, now we talk about, the bigger picture preservation, landmarks and, buildings like that. Well, to me, that's historical. That's a different thing. Though I was lucky enough to attend a talk by Michael Kimmelman, New York Times architecture critic, about a week ago. But he gave a talk about his new book, The Intimate City. And, he kind of opened the talk by saying, look, preservation is important, landmarks are important, but as a New Yorker, you always have to have change. You can't let preservation get in the way of evolution and change that is necessary. And he gave some great examples of that. So I don't know, does that address your question a little bit?
Look, you don't have to ever ask if it addresses the question. We're having a conversation here. And,
Right.
and I love your response. To put it in context, it's interesting. I feel like architecture is an art form. I believe that it's not a utilitarian task. It is on the function side of the work, right? But it's not like a Picasso. If you put a Picasso in a home, it doesn't have to withstand the elements. It doesn't have to withstand the changing nature of the environment. Or, someone who buys a Picasso doesn't come in one day and say, we bought a bigger house, so I need this painting to be bigger. So I'm going to add on to this Picasso. I mean, you just don't hear that, right? That's just not something anybody would ever say. And I think if you look at something like a Falling Water, for example, iconic piece of architecture, right? Nobody's ever going to go into that home and say, I just need to move the furniture around a little bit, or I want to enclose the balcony. I want to enclose it and make more livable space during the winter months. Nobody ever says that. And I think that it's interesting to have the academic conversation up and until, it's on my mind a great deal. I'm a native Angelino. I'm from Los Angeles. I've personally been through a wildfire. I get it.
Right.
When someone loses their home, that is part of their life. That is part of, depending on where you are in your phase of life, that could be part of your identity. And I feel like the responsibility on architects and designers to a large degree, but architects really, has grown exponentially because our weather patterns are changing, because the structures and the type of structures and the sustainability, I'm not talking about the products and sustainability, but the ability to sustain increased outside influences is greater now than it was even 10 years ago. And we don't even know what it's going to look like in 5 years from now. But Enda, you're not designing a home for 10 years from now. When you build a home, when you finish it and hand over the keys, it's not, hey, this is going to last 10 years. We'll see you in 10 years and that can't be how you think about it.
Of course not. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you think about the idea of future-proofing your work, it's not, I'm coming at it, I'm thinking about things differently these days. I really am. It's not so much about, my work is iconic because of who I am as an architect, but as an architect, because of who you are and you're working on behalf of your clients have no idea how they're going to use their home in 10 years or 20 years from now, let alone 100 years or 150. How do you think about that?
It's you typically, as an architect, you typically, you're trained to design homes for, with like a 75-year kind of a time frame in mind. I mean, that's kind of like your typical time frame. And that's, to do with, the life of materials, right? And things like that. And even though they will, good materials will last a lot longer than that, so much changes now. And it's even, and this goes back to what you just said, Josh. I mean, if you even think of the way, I remember doing homes back in the 90s with projector, the audio video component, right? Even think of that, right? And like the TVs with the massive cathode ray tubes, right? The cabinets and then we had a client I remember who was into all these projections, and I mean it was just, and now that technology, it could be in the Smithsonian. It feels so ancient at this point, right? And that was, that particular home was so high end and so, like high spec. And all of that audio video was trash within probably a few years. So, that's a great example, of how you just don't know what's coming. Lighting's another thing. I mean, lighting, I get asked by clients all the time, we're speccing light fixtures, and they go, will I be able to get replacement parts for this in 10 years? I was like, I have no idea. I'd say probably not, but I know that's going to last you 75,000 hours or whatever it is that it says on the spec. But, technology is just so constantly changing, in respect of certain things that you cannot tell somebody how something's going to last over time, except to say it's constantly changing. Technology is constantly changing. Materials, I think, absolutely. You use quality materials. I don't think you build a home for somebody with quality materials and you say to them, look, within your lifespan, you're not going to have to worry about this. I had a client I remember once who was, he was a lovely man. He was in his 80s, and he was very concerned about, the number of times his floors could be refinished in the future. And I had to very gently say, you're not going to have to worry about it. It's, you because, you can get 3 refinishings out of this floor, and you might have 15 years between refinishings. You're good, you know? So there's another thing, right? The lifespan of the building is probably going to go well beyond the lifespan of the people who built it. But then, of course, there are, their extended, a family, their descendants. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? And then the other thing that I definitely see is that you will not, you shouldn't expect the same devotion to a home. I mean, most of my work is residential. You shouldn't expect the same devotion to a home, that you got from the people who built it. You won't get that from their children or their children's children. I mean, they're removed from the process, and does it make sense for us to worry about what the next generation is going to do with a home? I don't think it really does. That's so out of our control.
You're listening to my conversation with architect Enda Donagher. We'll be right back. The most important word in the design industry today is service. Product, incredibly important. Price, important. Selection, incredibly important. But stellar service is the premier idea that can make all the difference in the success of any project. This is how design professionals like you demand great service for your projects. And you get your favorite brands in one place with expert, knowledgeable, and non-commissioned professionals to help you specify the right product for each of your projects and get the best price. Non-commissioned, that is incredibly important. And at Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home, a Best Buy company, that means their only incentive is your satisfaction. Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home, a Best Buy company, has just that with over 60 years of service in Southern California. Pacific Sales is your destination for exploration, advice, inspiration, all the best brands, great prices, the best in the industry when it comes to service, and you know it's reliable. You know that you are going to get predictable results, reliable results every time. And now you have the Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home team to help you with their Pro Rewards program, which is a trade program unlike any you've ever experienced before. Earn 3% in Best Buy e-gift cards or 2.5% in a reward check for every qualified and delivered sale, in addition to special trade pricing, exclusive offers, access to exclusive special events, and so much more that I can't even begin to try and list it all here. And here's the cherry on top. Access to exclusive builder trade incentives from top brands and the stellar service you deserve from a company that has been serving the industry for over 60 years. Now, terms and conditions apply to the Pro Rewards program and builder trade incentives. So visit a Pacific Sales expert at a showroom today for full details and learn how you can unlock additional savings and benefits. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best of the best. Visit Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home today and elevate your projects to new heights. At the highest level of design, the absolute best specifying designers, architects, landscape designers are all highly focused on the technology and performance of products and materials today. You have to, because the products you specify for your projects have to perform and they have to last. That's one of the reasons why I am so proud to be working with TimberTech. Their focus on the technical renaissance of synthetic decking is literally changing the conversation about innovation and performance. It pulls focus on three priorities homeowners have and expect from the products their designers and architects specify for their luxury projects. 1. Aesthetics must match the overall design and fit visually. 2. Durability and maintenance. I've told you about my board flipping stories from my own wood decks. Clients not only want beauty, but they want ease and ease of use, and they want it to last for decades. 3. Sustainably made. Clients are more conscious of the environment now, and they want the same of their materials. TimberTech hits each one of these elements with a product that not only meets expectations, they exceed them. TimberTech makes a synthetic decking that looks just like wood, color and embossed wood grain for a natural appearance. Their composite decking is technologically superior, as it has been created to last for decades, and it's manufactured with up to 85% recycled material. Their advanced PVC, vintage, and landmark collections have a Class A flame spread rating, making these products an amazing choice for wildfire-prone areas, which unfortunately continues to grow on the risk map. Check the show notes for more information about this and to find the nearest showroom or lumberyard where you can find TimberTech, or you can check them out directly, timbertech.com. I think that's really interesting. Something you said, just to back up a little bit, so in your mind, you're thinking about a 75-year time horizon.
Yeah,
on a project
for a home. That's pretty typical. Yeah, that's pretty typical.
It's funny because when I think about it, I think I think it's interesting. So I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm in a home that was built in 1936.
Right, so I'm more like closer to 100 years old.
Colonial revival,
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because you talk about tech and the way things change. You can see where the knob and tube was. You can see where the Cat 5 was at one point. You can see where the hardwired phones were at one point. You can see where the cable was at one point.
Yeah.
What you can't see is the lumber from 1936. So you figure it was harvested in, 35, 34. It's dense.
Yes,
A 2x4 was a 2x4, and
you're right.
the grain is tight.
Hmm.
If you look at lumber today, the grain is much looser.
Yeah, have you ever seen those comparisons of the
Yeah,
two? I mean, it's just because it grows so fast now. They grow so fast that it just doesn't have anything like the strength or the density.
it does.
Absolutely.
It has neither the
Yeah.
strength. So I'm a woodworker as well, and it's really interesting because when
Hmm.
I'm working with older growth material, and I take, I go for a cut, it's a different feel, right? As opposed to
Yes.
newer wood, it slips in. It's like butter, it shaves off. Whereas the old days, it
Hmm.
may still shave off, but you need a different. It has a different feel, and I
Yeah.
feel like that goes to the longevity of a home. And being from Los Angeles, you can look at LA very much the same way as a tree. And I know that you have built in so many different, you built residences in so many different cities and states
Hmm.
across the US that every area is so different. It almost doesn't even feel like the US. Idaho is so vastly different from New York City.
Indeed.
It's
Hmm.
just so different. And so when you're thinking about materials, and now in the wake of the fires in Southern California, the hurricanes in the south and east, the the snowpack, the floods, the snow density in the east and the north, what does modern materiality mean to you, and how has that changed the manner in which not just that you create the structure, but also because you do interiors as well? So
Right.
how does that change the way that you look at the interiors in comparison to the manner in which that you build the box?
Well, I think it goes back to what you said, Josh. I mean, about the way building is done regionally is, a lot flows from that. I mean, if you take, for example, we've done a lot of work in Florida, in South Florida, um, and you're always, dealing with, heat and humidity issues down there, condensation, heat, humidity. So you just have to be so careful with how you build in that climate. You don't have that issue in Idaho. In Idaho, you have the opposite. You have extreme, dry air, especially if you're up in the mountains at elevation. And whole different set of challenges with how you design your building envelope from outside to inside, to prevent issues like, condensation or, then in Idaho, you have the extreme cold, right? So you're always thinking, obviously, as an architect, that's how you have to start. You have to start with your local climate and working from the outside in. By the time you get to the interior and you have, designed a building envelope that functions the way it's supposed to function in whatever climate you're in, then your interiors are, fairly independent at that point, right? Just in terms of the materials and technically in terms of the materials, you don't really have to worry about that. It's interesting. We've been doing some work in the Middle East recently, and it's just been interesting to. It's been a great learning experience and a lot of fun, but it's very like building in Florida, with the heat and in some places where we've been the humidity, and we've been kind of falling back on our experience there. Um, Plus, interestingly enough, some of the Middle Eastern countries use a lot of British standards, which has required me to dig back into some of my really really early stuff, to pull out some of that information. But no, but to go back to your point, yeah, I think it really does. Regionally, yes, it's extremely different. Wherever you are, whether you're in Washington State or in South Florida or in somewhere like Idaho or the northeastern United States. Absolutely. You got a whole different set of challenges. What you have to always go back to is just your basic training and the principles, of good building envelope design, as a guiding factor, and just to keep yourself out of trouble.
Yes. At the
Right.
same time, I think it's really interesting that, and this is more of a question than a statement, but I feel
Hmm.
like things are changing because they have to, and living in South Florida for a year in Fort Lauderdale, block homes,
Yes.
cinder block. You could
Yep.
never do that in Southern California.
Hmm.
But if you could, it would so greatly help the fire issues.
Correct.
But what's also interesting is, if you look at Southern California, and I have these thoughts and ideas about architecture and how the nature of it's changing. You know, I think when people think about safety and security, fires, one would expect, especially if you were living in Altadena, Pasadena, or Pacific Palisades, you would expect that the fire department is going to be there to put out the fire before it reaches a dense area. Clearly, that's not the case this time. It wasn't the
Mhm.
case in Paradise. It wasn't the case in Lahaina. And
Right.
we're almost getting to the point now where if you haven't been thinking about working with, a sustainable material, a wood deck instead of a PVC product, a PVC product will melt. A wood product will burn. If you
Hmm.
have more burning, you will have greater spread or greater propensity or greater ability to spread. The idea of having a personal cistern or a pool, pools saved a lot of homes because the
Yeah.
fire department was able to tap into them when the hydrants went dry. The
Yep.
Someone having their own water source, someone having, basements. Back, World War II, people were building, before the nuclear age, people were, or at the nuclear age, people were building fallout shelters. Even in Southern California, this idea, being in Tulsa, a lot of people here have basements. If you don't have a basement, you can buy an aftermarket storm shelter for something like that.
Hmm.
As
Yep.
you, as it can, these, because, I feel like architecture used to be one of the more stable industries where you could look at building something for 75, 100, 150 years and using most of the same principles and practices to build the envelope. And then you're looking at the elevation and you're looking at the typography and you're looking at all of the other elements that go into a residential project. As things continue to change, does that change the manner in which you're sort of reviewing your work in the future? You're learning more about these types of things. South Florida, great example. You are going to have uh, sea rise. You're going to have flooding issues on a lot of the areas. All of the I was in an area called Las Olas where you had all of these individual fingers that led out into the intercoastal. You're going to have issues there, mountainous areas that are getting unpredictable levels of snow, which will lead to unpredictable levels of melt.
Yeah.
Does that, it's not like you're going back to school, but how does that change the way that you think about the residential projects in each individual region?
I mean, absolutely it does. I mean, you're right. I mean, now there's a whole new set. I mean, in such a short period of time, too, right? I mean, okay, I'm sure, I could have a lot of, environmentalists who could say, it's not a short period of time. We've been telling you guys this for a long time. However, in my lifetime, or certainly in my lifetime doing what I'm doing, which is like 30 plus years, it's changed enormously. I mean, the concerns. And it's funny, I was thinking as you were talking there, Josh, I was thinking when I worked for Terry Despont, we did projects all over the country, new homes, and pretty much every project we did we built the same way, and it didn't matter where we were. We did a cast in place concrete inner wall, and we did the exterior, whether it was limestone or a fieldstone or stucco, or depending on where we were. We built houses in Malibu, in Palm Beach, in Sun Valley, Idaho, all using that same construction formula of just everything was concrete, reinforced concrete, and we faced it with whatever we wanted to face it with. And it was incredibly expensive. It was like we were, and then on the inside leaf, we had inside the concrete, there was a stud wall, which was insulated, and we had the finishes on the inside. So you're building your house three times. You're building the concrete wall, you're building the exterior facing, and you're building the interior wall for the finishes and to support the services. Incredibly expensive way. It was like building a bunker. You mentioned like fallout shelters and bunkers. It worked everywhere, pretty much all over the country. Um, the clients were fine with it, and it was just a way to. It was like this just big budget way to just kind of build houses using this one system. And it was the exception to that was homes that we did in places like Martha's Vineyard that would have been more traditionally framed houses, but even homes that were done out in Ohio, places like that, all the same, just all built the same way. And that was really ignoring local, in a way, kind of didn't worry about local customs, didn't worry about local materials, didn't really worry about anything except here's a way we know we can build a really solid house. Um, and I was just thinking about that. My mind was going back to those times because yeah, that was just like would work anywhere. But for most people, the reality is yes, you have to really think about the flood, now about, the flooding and the risk of fire and, you know, extreme temperature, right, is another thing. So, yeah, it's something that for particularly for, for people in the everyday world, yes, it's a big deal right now.
How do you see materiality and practice changing in the future, for example, or at least how do you think about it? For example, it used to be that prefabricated manufactured was a dirty word. It really was. It
Hmm.
was, manufactured homes are not luxury, can't possibly be
Right.
a luxury residential. But the rise of the ADU, whether it's stick built or a manufactured prefab structure, has proven to be something that's really serviceable.
Yes.
The idea of formed concrete is absolutely expensive, but some of these 3D concrete residences, I think they're probably more um, academic than reality based at this point.
Hmm.
But something like moving to a steel stud instead of wood, as we were talking about, seems to me, look, I know a lot about architecture, but I'm certainly not an architect. I do not know that. I'm not an engineer. I don't know the structural nature of it. I don't know what it does in various conditions. I do know that if you have an area that goes to 100 degrees at 70% humidity, like South Florida, or an area that goes to 5 degrees and 10% humidity, like Idaho,
Hmm.
it will affect any wood. Thoughts on materiality and practice moving forward? Do you look at different ways of building, and is that something that you can imagine your firm employing at some point in the future?
I think that, it's interesting you said, about, technologies that feel experimental or academic right now. I would certainly, that's how everything starts off, right? Somebody has to just kind of get the ball rolling. So it'll be interesting just to kind of see where they go. But in terms of like what we have available to us now and what we use now, I mean, you mentioned steel versus wood, studs for framing. Yeah, but on the other hand, steel and concrete are incredibly damaging to the environment in their production phases. Wood is a sustainable resource and a renewable resource, rather. So I do think that particularly in the United States, I have a hard time seeing us moving away from wood framing as renewable because of its renewability and the tradition that we have here of building in wood, which not there are not an awful lot of other countries in the world. I mean, there are some, but it's a really huge tradition here. So I don't see that going anywhere for quite a while. I really don't. And then you're just talking about the, fireproofing. I mean, I'm sure you're well aware, Josh, that heavy timber is essentially fireproof, if it's properly detailed. And they've been experimenting now and they've done some, high rise, how to build high rises out of timber. I find that fascinating. um, I've forgotten now. They've gotten pretty high now with the timber frame high rise. I'm pretty excited about that. I think it's pretty neat. So yeah, I don't see in residential construction how we're going to really move away from wood for quite a while, and particularly to your point, the expense of building in, these other materials like concrete, steel, prohibitive for most people, unless you get into the very high end price point, then it's a different conversation. But in terms of how I look at things, yeah, I love to build in concrete. I love to build in steel. When the project calls for it and the client calls for it, it's great. But I do think though for the majority, you're looking at, for example, in Los Angeles right now, I mean, the amount of rebuilding that has to happen, how is that all going to happen? I don't see how. I don't see, I see wood as being, it's here to stay for the foreseeable future, in my opinion, in residential, home building.
I don't disagree with you. I think though that where we are now, this, and it's really interesting, and it's kind of fun for me to look back at past episodes because these conversations are fluid in nature. They
Hmm.
always sort of weave in where we are in current times.
Right.
So where we are in current times, we're talking about tariffs, and
Hmm.
one of our largest lumber partners is to the north in Canada.
Yep.
And as of this recording, the 25% tariffs have been stayed for, I think, what, 30, 75 days, something of that nature.
Hmm.
And you have no idea what's going to happen next. But fluctuations in pricing of materials like this, by the same token, you have our neighbors to the south who have traditionally held cheap Chinese steel, which I don't think those two commodities prices will ever get to an equilibrium, certainly. But
Hmm. Hmm.
I do think that advancements in technology and the fact that we don't recycle enough of either of the materials. You talk about old hardwood lumber that was built to use older homes when they're torn down because of rules and regulations, especially in California. You can't build with them. They're not structurally sound to build with, so they go into a landfill. Unless they're otherwise used
Repurp.
for
Yeah.
repurposed for
Yeah.
furniture or something else, but it doesn't solve the initial issue. I think and I feel like we're in this phase right now, this experimental phase through need and necessity.
Hmm.
If you look at Southern California, here's the math, right? And it's tragic if you take the feelings out of it, though. If you lose 10,000 housing units in a region that is already in a housing shortage, availability becomes an issue. Supply chain becomes an issue. Logistics become an issue. If you can't build the houses because you don't have the materials to do it, there's no workaround to that unless you invent, unless you create, unless you repurpose in a manner that is usable. What is the process? And I don't have any idea what the answer to this question is. What is the experimental nature? What does the research and development side of architecture look like today?
It's interesting, you bring up about invention, right? Necessity being the mother of invention. I mean, even look at what happened, the news that came out last week, with AI from China, because, we were throttling the number of chips that we were sending there. So they came up with a good workaround to that. So yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, this is how new things happen. Research and development in architecture. Look, I mean, a lot of it is coming from private businesses, right? Who are responding to needs just like the one that you described so well. There are materials, that maybe it's thinking about how do we use materials in a different way. But again, it goes back so much to the local climate and where you're building, because I mean, in California, not only do you have to worry about wildfires now and the threat from that, you also have seismic considerations, right? So you have to, I mean, you're in a high seismic zone, so you can't, whatever solution you come up with for building, all that rebuilding that has to happen in California has to also satisfy that requirement. So it can't be, in my mind, it's hard. Is it impossible? No, but there, it's not the solution. It can't really be like a temporary kind of a fix, post-hurricane type of temporary housing type thing. It's got to be something that's going to last. So where does it come from? I think what's happening a lot. I mean, yes, there are bodies who do research into materials, developing new materials. I think a lot of it, though, in this case, is going to be driven economically. I mean, there's no question. I don't think the tariffs, I'm hoping that the issue with the tariffs is not going to become, and I don't want to get into, the whole political side of anything, but my feeling is that that's not going to become a long-term problem, or my hope is that it's not going to become a long-term problem, because I think if the need is there, then we're just going to have to find a way around that, in terms of allowing government is never supposed to get in the way of development, so it's supposed to encourage development. So I think anything that is ultimately stopping this rebuilding from happening, the public's not going to stand for that. That would have to be corrected. So I don't think, in my mind, I don't worry so much about that, to be honest with you. But there are going to be material shortages. It's going to happen. I mean, you have all of this. There's going to be labor shortages and material shortages. It's inevitable with this scale of the rebuilding that has to happen now. I don't see how that's not going to happen. It's going to drive prices through the roof, probably, for a lot of people, and that I do worry about. I think. I mean, I'm thinking back to during COVID. You know, remember how the mayhem with this with supply chain, and every week in what we did, every week it was a new random thing that the contractors weren't able to get, and you could not predict it. Could be anything, from the sub-zero refrigerators to soundproofing mat. Yeah, it just was something random every single week, and that went on for a couple of years. Um, so, and that issue is not even really fully behind us. I think we're still suffering the after effects of that. So, and lump that on top of what you just described, Josh, you know? So yeah, we've got lots of challenges, no question.
But listen, and here's the thing. Here's where I come to sort of a fork in the road.
Hmm.
I, I love architects and designers. I love the work that you do. I love the purpose behind it. I really do. I don't think enough people employ architects and designers. Is 1, 2, 5%. It's single digits,
Right.
the number of people. And look, let's be honest, unless you're talking about homeless, everyone lives in a house or a residence of some sort. And the fact that in Los Angeles you still have dingbats is just astounding to me. Dingbat
Hmm.
architecture, the fact that they're still there in an
Yeah.
earthquake prone zone is just
Yeah.
astounding to me. But I think that the importance of architecture, especially now, because things are fluid and they are changing so rapidly, and it's not just Southern California. It's, there are different issues in Texas, and there are different issues in Florida, and there are different issues in the Northeast, in the Northwest, and the Midwest. With fracking, we have earthquakes in Oklahoma. And it's not a political, I agree with you. Nobody wants to have that political conversation anymore because it's too painful. It's
Mhm.
it's agonizing now. You can't have a fair political conversation because you don't really know with whom you're speaking, or what those views are. But what I do think, and what is inarguable, is that things are changing at a at a rapid pace. And look, in at the end of World War II, you had in Southern California and elsewhere this tract home explosion because we had a problem, and they came up. Eichler was working on tract homes. It's just astounding to me. But there is a need for it. And I think at the end of the day, it's when you look to architects for solutions, when you look to designers for the solutions. And if I had to say, it would be that architects and designers have a greater say in the development of policy and there isn't a lot of that. And I think part of that is because when you look at the trade publications, nobody's picking up Arc Digest anymore to see the architecture. It's sad, but true. People are picking
Hmm.
up Arc Digest. Really, they're probably going to the website more to see the video of Kim Kardashian's new home. But they're not looking at the architecture of it. They're looking to see, what the closet looks like. Okay, that may be where we are now, but I don't think it diminishes the importance of the work. And that being said, I'm excited. What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to sort of as the next phase of architecture in an ever-changing landscape?
Interesting. I think I'm always excited about reuse and adaptation of existing structures. That's something that is it the next phase of architecture? No, it's but I'm always excited about that. And going back to what you said a moment ago, Josh, about architects having more of a say in policy making. Architects are very much, constrained, by, other forces, right? There's other forces that, oftentimes will override the architect, whether it's economics or, public policy or whatever that's already in place or something like that, that can make it hard for that voice to come out and see the light of day. I do think that maybe this is a good time, to re-engage a little bit more with academia, and to the voice of, people, architecture students, professors, people who are not subject at that point. You're not subject to those, everyday economic forces that really influence a lot of what you're able to do. And maybe there is a need now for some of those voices to be heard with, well, what would be, some thinking about, what we're going through right now with climate change and, cross-pollination of ideas that's able to happen at an academic level, in a university between architecture people, urban planners, environmental studies, academics, that there's somehow a way for those discussions, which are always happening, to get a little bit more airtime. Because out in the commercial world, it's always going to be very hard for architects unless you have a really, unless you're somebody that you speak at everyone just listens to, and there's not an awful lot of us who have achieved that, but there are some, but I do think that the academic field maybe has an opportunity, or maybe there's a chance now for academics to be listened to a little bit more, because a lot of it's going to be about science, and architects are not scientists. We occupy this zone where we're kind of in between art and science, and we're kind of trying to be able to be good at all of those things to a certain extent. But I think a lot of the challenges that we're facing now will need a certain scientific input, whether it's in the development of new materials or ways to looking at aspects of climate change, or whatever it might be. And I think a lot of that good discussion can happen at the college level, academic level, PhD level. I think maybe it's time to hear some more of those voices and to kind of get that into the mix a little bit more.
Totally agree with you. The one thing that I would add to that, I think you're spot on. The only thing that I would add to that is the academics side of it only becomes relevant when the consumer side of it understands the importance.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's kind of the hard part. That's why, it's not a bash on AD, but I do wish that there are trade pubs that only architects read. I do, yes. But ArcDigest used to be that one bridge between the trade and consumer. And I do wish that there was another side of it. That being said, and it's funny, and I apologize, because one of the things that I absolutely love to do on this show is to dive deep as I can in the time that we have into the work. And I have found this conversation so fascinating that we find ourselves at the end of it before I get a chance to actually dive into your work, which I really do love. And
thank you.
I would love to have you back on to discuss it. And in the meantime, anyone who's listening, please, as usual, go to the show notes, and you can click on the website and see the firm of that Enda's firm does the work. It's amazing. It's beautiful, and there's a lot to it and a lot to discuss. So thank you.
It'd be thrilled.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back. So thank you, Enda, for taking the time today. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I loved it.
The Design Hardware Showroom is a space where specifiers can go and find an incredible selection of high-end faucets, luxury tile, natural stone, wood floors, and bespoke hardware, and so much more. Select products are presented in a holistic manner, strategically arranged to stimulate creativity and transition your vision from the conceptual stage to a fully realized space. You will find everything you're looking for, even the products by brands you didn't know you didn't know. Surprise and delight. Am I right? All under one roof on 3rd Street in Los Angeles, just up the street from the Grove. Conveniently located, free parking available. Stop by to find inspiration, collect samples, get expert advice, and tackle everything on your specification list all in one place. Visit them online at designhardware.com, at Design Hardware and Flooring on the socials, or in the real world, 6053 West 3rd Street in Los Angeles. Thank you, Enda. Loved our chat. Thank you to my incredible partner sponsors, Thermosol, TimberTech, Pacific Sales, and Design Hardware. Amazing companies and great friends of the trade. So please give them an opportunity on your next project. And thank you for listening, subscribing to the show, and sharing the show with your colleagues who you think might be interested. And if not already subscribing, please consider doing so, that you receive every new episode automatically to your podcast feed. Until next week, thank you for sharing this time together. And until the next episode, be well, stay focused. And now that it has arrived in earnest, try to rise above the chaos.